We have a presentation by Tony Grieggs that was scheduled to be before our dinner break, but we ran a little long, so we'll go ahead and do that presentation now. Tony, you ready?
It's Tony Esquire. Tony's been with the Environmental Compliance Group, Los Alamos, for several years. I've had the pleasure of working with him, and he's going to give us a brief update on current permit changes that are ongoing in Los Alamos. Not all of these are the permits, but he can show everyone that NNMCAB address all permit changes.
Thank you, Lee. So, my name is Tony Grieggs. I'm the group leader of one of the laboratories in environmental protection, emergency compliance, and protocol. We cover a lot of ground. You're not going to get Mark Haggenstad today. He had a family commitment that came up, so he asked me to give his portion of the talk as well. And I'll do my best to answer your questions on that one, too. Next slide, please. So Lee saw this and asked me to spend a little more time on it than I had originally planned. The real message here in terms of the laboratory is we are a highly regulated facility. We do a lot of complex industrial work, a lot of activities, we have a lot of facilities. And we are regulated by a number of federal agencies and state agencies. We have a wide variety of permits. We're only going to talk about a couple of those tonight that are currently in play. And I believe that Pete's vision for this is for us to become more of a regular feature at some of these meetings. I don't know what that frequency will look like. Maybe it's dictated by activity, permitted activity or something. But today we're going to talk about, or this evening at this point, a couple of groundwater discharge permits, NPDES permit, and the hazardous waste facility permit. I used to manage all the hazardous waste programs at the laboratory. We reorged about a year or so ago, and somebody else is doing that right now. Currently, I have the groundwater plans, the NPDES permits, the dredge and fill, the Title V air operating permits, and the construction air permits. So this is pretty busy, so you'll want to just look at it. If you have any questions, just interrupt me. I'm happy to take them on. But I'd like to get to where we are right now in the permit. Oh, yeah, a lot of jargon. We're sorry about that. NPDES is National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. It's one of several programs under the Clean Water Act. When we talk about NPDES or Clean Water Act permits, the NPDES permit we're going to talk about will be industrial alcohol. I'll talk about that in a minute. You also hear about stormwater permits, and at some point we may talk about those at a later session. They are also NPDES. You'll find jargon is a problem, and I use it a lot, so go ahead and interrupt me. Next slide, please. So, just very briefly, what Pete asked us to do was to give you an idea of what's in play right now and what's coming, what your role, both as CAB members and as the public, might be in this whole process. So, the first one I want to talk about there are the groundwater discharge permits. Those permits are administered and issued by the state of New Mexico, the New Mexico Environment Department. The most important one that we have in play right now is RLW, the radioactive liquid waste treatment plant. So that permit went public. I'm going to check my notes here so I get these dates right for you. So NNMCAB issued a draft permit on September 13th of this year, so just about a week ago. And that public comment period is 90 days. So you, the CAB members, either as members of the CAB or as a member of the public, you can submit comments as an individual, as a member of an organization. I believe they'll accept them in email, in letters. Steve, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they'll take them in just about any form. I don't know if they'll take verbal necessarily, but any written comment will be considered by them. Yes, sir?
Is this a permit to discharge to groundwater?
Not exactly. So as I walk through here, we have a discharge to the environment from a facility, and that discharge is to the surface. The groundwater discharge permits address the potential for that discharge to impact groundwater. I think that's probably about the simplest way to say it.
Thank you.
Could you just draft permit is out, could it be sent to William? So, and it was going to get a copy? I wondered if that draft permit is out for consideration. Could that permit be sent to William? So if some of us wanted to look at it, he could then send it to us?
I think so. Is that something?
It should be on the web.
It is on the web.
NNMCAB, right?
Correct. NNMCAB sent out a notice. It was in the newspapers. I think somebody picked it up on a radio ad that I heard too. I don't think that was an NNMCAB ad. It was a really, but it's in the papers and it's on their website. But I think if we can figure out a way to distribute that.
Really, you can take that action to give them.
Thank you.
So some of the more important aspects of that particular permit is it includes a lot of monitoring and reporting on groundwater and the discharge itself. So we're monitoring the facility and the quality of the water that's being discharged, but we're also monitoring groundwater. You heard a lot about groundwater earlier today, and a lot of these pieces all work together. There's an awful lot of monitoring happening at the lab overall. I do believe, subject to public opinion, you'll get reviewed, there'll be comments, and will have to address those comments. I do think it's a pretty good permit in terms of being protective of human health and the environment. It looks like it's pretty complete to me, pretty good.
So Tony, I'm correct, because it sounds a little misleading. It's not that we are discharging radioactive liquid waste. This is actually the permit for the rad liquid waste treatment facility where we take the effluent from the laboratories, clean it up, and then discharge the clean water to the environment. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I was going to talk more of that when we got to the NNMCABs, the surface water. But yes, essentially what we have here is the groundwater discharge permit and the NPDES discharge permit that's for the outfall. They are regulating the same discharge. One's issued by the state, the other one by EPA. So we have one pipe, one outflow regulated by two different permits. And they talk to one another. NNMCAB and EPA do as well.
On the groundwater, if water is 1,000 feet below, I understood it took like 900 years for water to trickle down.
That's my understanding.
Charge down. Is the time frame of safety that this permit looks at for 900 years, or is it looking at impacts on groundwater that might get to the Rio Grande real soon, the first chapter, or is it other?
So the permits are issued obviously for much shorter time frames,
Yeah.
typically 5 years for both of these that we're talking about.
Okay.
And potential impacts to groundwater is in this particular case, is what NNMCAB is considered. And they're looking at the same science that we're looking at. A lot of stuff is looking back, for instance. Pat was on that side, and was on this side of the same issue. So in terms of whether or not this permit is adequately protected 1,000 years out, I'm not sure I can speak to that, to be perfectly frank. What I do believe is that because of the quality of the effluent, the limited quantities that are being discharged, the geology and the science that we heard some about tonight, that it is protected.
I guess what I was trying to ask, is there a standard time frame of effects for these permits? And what is it for?
Not for this particular permit.
Okay.
If I understand your question.
Yeah, that's my question.
So there are some other groundwater discharge permits that are in play, but currently nothing's happening on them. The RLW permit is the higher priority. We have a sanitary waste system. It's a sewage plant, just like all the towns in the state have. That one's in play. We have about 20 septic tanks on site. They require a groundwater discharge permit. Those are for the more remote facilities in the laboratory. Land application. You heard about the wells. We pump wells, we purge them, we sample them. That water has to go somewhere. So we're pumping water out of the aquifer occasionally, and we have to do something with that water once we develop those wells. Oftentimes that means land application. So the water is sampled, it's characterized, and NNMCAB has provided standards and guidance that we have to meet. And assuming that all of that lines up, then we can land apply it. So at that point, we're basically watering the fields.
Tony,
Yes.
as I understand it, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that we're pumping chromium out of the groundwater, treating it, and then applying it to the land.
Yes, that would potentially will happen.
Does that require permitting?
Yes.
It does.
I won't go through some of the potential exceptions, but generally speaking, any discharge to the environment requires some type of permit, and oftentimes more than one type of permit.
Typically, anytime you retrieve groundwater in any form or fashion, you have to work with the state engineer. That's a different kind of approach because then you're acquiring groundwater and you have to have water rights. I think most of us realize that in the West, water rights are a very serious issue.
Absolutely. So before I go on to the NPDES permit, and you'll see that there's some overlap here, do you guys have any questions on the groundwater discharge? We're in 90-day public comments, so that puts us somewhere in the middle of December, I think, something like that. So I urge you to comment if you are so inclined, and I'm pretty certain that any of you will consider those comments. So, surface water, the NPDES permit. This is where we'll talk a little bit about Lee's concern about what is it that we're discharging. So the laboratory has operated under an NPDES permit of some type or another since, I believe, about 1978 is when we got our first permit. And those permits have been renewed, they're issued for 5 years, and they've been renewed every time since then. Back in whenever they started in the 70s, 80s, there were about 150 outfalls. So an outfall is a discharge from some operation. And they're not always onerous, but it's water coming out of the pipes. We initiated an outfall reduction program back in the 90s. We've been highly successful. DOE was very supportive of that, EPA and later NED when they were involved. So we're down to 11 outfalls now. So 11 pipes. And of those 11, only 7, only 7 of those are actually discharging. The others we're managing as, you'll hear phrases like zero liquid discharge, ZLD. Sometimes people coin other terminology. But the point is, those facilities, even though they have a permit, because we might need to at some point, typically we're managing that water in some other fashion. We're not releasing it to the environment. So the facilities that we have the outfalls out right now are the power plant. The laboratory has a small power plant that mostly idles. We don't run it very much, but it's also a steam plant. We have the SWISH, the sanitary waste facility. That's the sewage plant, and it's combined with what we call the SERF, the sanitary effluent recycling facility. We recycle a large amount of water now. We get, and I'll talk about where we use that water in a minute, but that's water that traditionally, using older technologies, would have just been discharged. We pump groundwater out. It's potable water is what we started with. It comes out of our wells. We put it into a facility, cooling tower, for instance, or something else. We use it, or in this case, it's sanitary water, so it's sewage that goes to a treatment plant, which is a pretty high-quality plant. We take the treated effluent from the sanitary plant, we pump that to the SERF, and we polish that water. One of the problems we have, Pat will talk about this for a long time, but one of the issues we have with groundwater in the area is a lot of silica in water. It creates problems for higher tech issues. Now, I'm not a chemist, and don't ask me to explain that. But what we do is we polish that water, we get additional contaminants out of it, we get some of the silica out of it, flocks out, and we send very clean, arguably ultra clean water up to other facilities for reuse, like some of the cooling towers. So we have the RLWTF, we just talked about, I'll talk about that in a minute again, and then 7 of these 11 outfalls are cooling towers. There's nothing special about those cooling towers other than the operations that they serve. They're not any different from the cooling towers you'll see around town here, or down in Santa Fe or Albuquerque, serving industrial facilities. They're designed to do exactly what they're called. They cool water, they usually chill, they're usually non-contact. So you'll have a computing facility, for instance, where they generate a lot of heat. And they'll have cooling coils that go through this. You'll have a cooling tower where the water runs down through it. The whole idea is evaporative cooling. So we're reusing that surf water, the water that we polish from the sanitary plant, in our cooling towers. We hope to be able to do that, broaden that activity over the next several years, all subject to funding and engineering challenges, of course. They have to have an infrastructure to redistribute water and those sorts of things. So the RLW, the radioactive liquid waste treatment plant, it worries a lot of people, and people should be concerned. We have a plant that receives radioactive liquid effluent, and it's treated. The treatment is pretty high quality, and there's several different treatment processes in there, and they selected the process based on the quality of the water, radionuclides, whatever else might be in the water. The NPDES permit that we are currently operating under, the one that will be replaced by this new one, if and when that happens, the effluent limits, meaning the chemistry of the water that is being discharged to the environment, or in this case, to the ZLD, we actually are not dumping water into the environment from this plant, actually meets or exceeds most of the drinking water standards. It's the cleanest, I've heard it said, it's the cleanest dirty water you'll ever see. And I don't mean to make light of it. It's a hard thing to do. It's expensive. It takes a lot of high technology and good operators to make that work. But that water is extremely clean. And we're really proud of that fact. So with the RLW, we used to have a discharge in that canyon, and it's conceivable at least that we might have to discharge at some point. I'm not sure that I see that in my future. So we've gone to evaporation. And we have two different systems to evaporate, partly because of the weather. We have a mechanical evaporator, which is a gas-fired evaporator. We run the plant in batch mode. It's not like a sewage plant that just runs 24/7 and peaks in the morning and peaks in the evening, so to speak. The RLW runs in batches. So if somebody does an experiment, they send a batch of water down. It could be anywhere from literally just a few gallons to several thousand gallons. They'll go into a holding tank of one kind or another, depending on the exact makeup, and then they'll analyze that to make sure they know what's in the water, and they'll select the treatment process based on what's in that water and treat it to the standards. No water is being discharged until it meets the effluent limits, the standards that are in the permit. So it's a really important fact because people envision, and if you've been around long enough to remember what discharges looked like in the 60s and 70s, a lot of things happen. People dumped a lot of stuff, and they could do it legally. So NMED has to certify. The NPDES permit is a federal permit. It's issued by the EPA. NMED has to certify that permit before it can be finalized. So EPA extended NMED's. They were on a schedule just like everybody else. NMED asked for an extension, and it was granted by EPA. NMED submitted their certification on the draft NPDES permit on Friday the 18th, Thursday the 18th. So EPA is in the process of reviewing that. Now that certification is conditional, so NMED didn't just say, oh yeah, permit looks good. They applied what they believe are appropriate and protective standards, and they and EPA will work that out. EPA will review those that were incorporated directly into the permit. They, I guess, potentially might decline it, and there will be a discussion or debate on what that means. But in the end, we anticipate that we'll probably see a permit around the end of October, early November, or something like that. That's just a guess, an educated guess on when we might see that permit. And then presumably that'll take effect about a month later. They publish it with an effective date. So before I leave NPDES, are there any questions?
What is that permit going to allow you to do?
The NPDES permit?
Right.
The NPDES permit will authorize us, for lack of a better term, to discharge water that meets the effluent limit. So whatever the standards are in that permit, we have to demonstrate. There's a lot of monitoring. So every single outfall, every discharge is sampled and analyzed, and then the results of that analysis are compared to the effluent limits, the limits in the permit. If the limits are met, then we can discharge. If not, then we have to do something else.
Yes, there's a permitting sequence that you've got here, and I just wondered, what is the amount of time that it takes to complete one of these?
Well, it varies a lot depending on facilities, types of operations, whether it's state or federal, because their processes are generally the same, but they have slightly different schedules for some things. For this particular NPDES permit, for instance, which is on a 5-year cycle, we had to resubmit or submit an application for permit renewal. I think this one went in February of 2012. So this one's on 18-month cycle, more or less, even longer than that. For some of the other permits, the groundwater discharge permits, for instance, those have come and gone for lots of different reasons. Some of those groundwater discharge permits have been in process for about 15 years. I think one of those was submitted in '96, an application. There was some process and some churn and progress by everybody, and then things happen, like they do, and they sort of languished. In that particular instance, what we did with the laboratory was, there was a draft permit that was never finalized. We agreed to voluntarily meet the discharge limits in that permit for that period of time, and we have done so all this time. So with the issuance, hopefully, of this new groundwater discharge permit, all the history will go away, and we'll be working to the terms and conditions of these new, or will the current permits. So can we get to the next? Oh, we're okay. So this is the part of talking Mark Haggerstead was going to do. So the hazardous waste facility permit.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Yes.
Wasn't quite clear as to, you said we'll do something, but what is that something? Is there a contingency on the permit issue?
For the moment, what happens is that the current permits are administratively extended. The NPDES permit, for instance, by EPA, and it'll stay in effect until they either issue a new permit or they decline it, in which case we have to find something else to do. And we try to put those plans in place. Sometimes it's not so easy. But you always want to look forward to this is how we do business today, what's happening in the relatively near future, and what's happening longer term. What we're seeing, of course, is we have water issues in the state of New Mexico. We don't have a lot of water, first off. We want to make sure we're protective of the quality of that water. I think we've done, we in the laboratory, not me personally necessarily, have done a very good job of all of those things. What it'll look like a couple of years from now, I'm not sure, but I can tell you. A lot of that has to do with federal budgeting, changes in mission. We have to be able to accommodate old missions, existing missions, and new missions, both that are planned right now and things that we can't foresee.
Thank you.
So for the hazardous waste facility permit, Bob, you were asking about cycles. The hazardous waste facility permit, the first one was issued early in my career when I started doing regular work for hazardous waste work. The first one was issued in 1989. And that was a 10-year permit. So back to your question a little bit about planning for the future. We knew that permit was going to expire in 99, had a date right there on it, and of course we modified that periodically through time as mission and facilities changed. We worked on that application with NNMCAB off and on for several years. We need to get it in about a year and a half, 18 months ahead of the expiration date, but we knew because of the complexity and the interest it was going to take a long time to get done. So we backed that up, and we actually were working that fairly continuously with NNMCAB. That permit was expired in 1999. It was administratively extended pending the outcome of permit negotiations and such. That permit was finally replaced with a new permit that was issued in November of 2010. So it was a 10-year extension on that. So sometimes when they're very complex and there's lots of interest, these things can go on for a long time. There were hearings requested on that. Those hearings went 5 weeks. 5 weeks of hearings. I think there were something on the neighborhood of 20 full days of body contact. So it was a long process. There was a lot of public involvement, there were a lot of regulators involved, there were a lot of people from the DOE and lands involved as well. So where we are right now is we have that permit, it's in place. That permit applies to places like T54, parts of T55, some smaller facilities. We're doing a permit modification right now to, we still call it the ramp facility, it's not really the ramp facility anymore, but if we change the name now, everybody will get confused and think something else was happening. So the ramp facility was the radioactive assay non-destruct test facility up there. So the public comment on that was completed in August. And NMED is currently processing those comments. I believe that, I wish there's nobody here that can confirm this for me, but I think NMED actually issued a decision on that yesterday, the 24th. I haven't seen it yet because I'm not in that management chain anymore. But I believe that's true, so I think something official in writing will hit the streets sometime this week if it hasn't already.
So Tony, just real quick, most people realize this on the board. The ramp facility is our true waste shipping facility. That's where we stage all the shipments. That's where George's teams come in and bring a cask in, load the cask, and we ship from WIC to there. This particular permit request focused on additional storage capacity so we can increase efficiency of shipments.
Right out of the mouth. That's perfect. So to actually put a fine point on it, the bulk of that is to ask for a capacity increase at the ramp facility, but it's to enhance throughput of waste that is leaving Area G and going out and heading to WIC. So we have waste stored in Area G right now. That's what the process is. We're not asking to be allowed to add additional waste to the ramp. What we need is to be able to move that waste from G through this system faster and out to the WIC. And we believe that this change will allow us to do that. Get you there?
Great.
So, interrupt me if you have any questions. The TWIF, Transuranic Waste Facility, this is a new facility. As we close Area G, the long-term plan for Area G is to get all the waste out of there, shut down, remove the facilities, restore and cap to some agreed upon level of protection. I'm not sure if anybody actually knows what that answer looks like yet because it's a very complex program. But at some point, Area G will no longer be functioning as a waste management site. It's going to be shut down. It may be monitored or whatever, but it won't be a waste management site any longer. The laboratory, however, has an enduring mission. It's a national security mission. We will continue to generate some amount of transuranic waste. So this new true facility, which will be very close to T55, it's right up the road, will be managing only newly generated transuranic waste. So we need to get out of G, so we get the ramp permit law in place. That enhances movement of Area G, keep the waste out of G. We have a new facility, so we can continue to mission the laboratory. All those things work together to help us to get rid of waste, clean up, move to closure of some of these sites. So we're only going to store containers. We're not doing any treatment of any kind there. What else do you think?
The new true facility will be basically 6 warehouses. We did 6 warehouses because of the aircraft analysis for our HAZCAT 3 storage facility. We do limited characterization. We won't do any repackaging. In fact, most of it will be characterized before it ever leaves TA55. And when Tony says we'll get all the waste out of Area G, we all know that means all the retrievably stored true waste. It is still a low-level waste cell, and we intend at this point on capping, at least presumably is capping that low-level waste cell, and modeling that with RCRA, which we reviewed probably about 1.5 years ago, and we can review that again, the dose modeling for that long-term stewardship of that facility.
Thank you. So the public comment period for the TWIF was completed in March. NMED is currently processing that application. I would anticipate seeing something on it in the near future. So just very briefly, some other permitting activity that's underway, which you might be seeing in the near future. The open detonation. The laboratory has open detonation for waste treatment. There's other open detonation that's research related, so it's an important distinction. One is subject to permitting and requires a permit, and the other one is not. So the application for the open detonation program was submitted in July of 2011. At the moment, it's sitting there because all of these other things have been prioritized by agreement amongst us, NNMCAB, and LANL. But at some point, there'll be some activity on that. The open burn, we also do burn. We have a single burn unit at the laboratory for burning high explosive contaminated waste. It's a relatively small unit with good gas burner on it. That revised application is going to be submitted by the end of this month. So, when's that? A couple days? When that submittal goes into the NNMCAB, we'll have 7 days to do a public notice. So, normally, I guess October 7th will be a public notice of the submittal to the NNMCAB, and that will begin the public comment period. And that will be a 60-day comment period. So again, each of you, as cabinet members or as members of the public, have the opportunity to comment, and NNMCAB will respond to those comments. Yes, sir.
Tony, is that going to be an air quality permit?
No. For these particular permits, the potential air quality issues are being managed by NNMCAB under the hazardous waste permit. Yes, sir.
So can you explain the open detonation process?
So we have R&D, which could be any number of things. They tend to be relatively small these days. For the open detonation process that's subject to permitting, we're treating waste. One of the things that happens with high explosives, even commercial explosives, and we have some R&D as well, once you perturb that in some fashion, you've done an experiment perhaps that went awry and it wasn't consumed. At that point, you have a piece of HE with unknown properties. You can't, when you get commercial HE, it's characterized pretty well. Experts can predict somewhat what the behavior of that material will be. And from that, they derive some sort of safety and safe handling practices. But when you do an experiment with something, you perturb it, maybe you have a partial detonation, you wind up with a piece of something. You don't know anything about the properties anymore. You don't know if it's still stable. Is it still safe to handle? So you don't want to put it on the road. You don't want to handle it any more than you have to. So we have detonation sites. Typically what they would do is take those pieces, stack them together in some fashion. And there's a lot of art and science that goes into that in terms of what they know about HE, how it behaves, and how a detonation would pass through a material. Usually they will put an HE charge on it, a known charge, something that they know how to behave. And that would be the initiating charge. And they want to detonate it because the most hazardous property of HE obviously is the explosive hazard. Once they've detonated it, rendered it safe, then they can do something else with the residents if they need to, with their art.
Okay, you say there's none planned now. Do you have material that's waiting in the queue
I would
for that process?
Probably. I don't know for certain at any given moment because experiments come and go all the time. But it's not improbable that there's some small amount stored, and they don't like to store a lot of it. So typically, if they have an experiment go awry, they always have a waiting period of hours to a day or two to make sure, so nobody approaches it. They have an experiment, and something doesn't go right. Stand back, let's watch it for at least a couple hours, make sure you don't have a late discharge. You don't want someone working with when that happens. Typically, they would try to assemble those kinds of things fairly quickly. In other cases, if we have a waste HE, for instance, it might be a commercial HE that we don't want to put on the road in our inventory, we might detonate that as well. We don't feel like we can safely transport it or treat it in some other fashion. And on-site treatment of HE really is limited to open burn or open detonation.
And that's safe.
I'm sorry?
And that is safe.
It's the safest approach we can use.
Safety is a relative term. Whenever you deal with energetic materials, you want to be as safe as you can be.
This mimics the DOD process for unexploded ordnance, because you don't know if a portion of it is unexploded, you don't know its current condition. So the safest resolution is to detonate it in place, render it harmless versus trying to transport it to another location, jeopardizing people on the road, the public, those types of things. So while it seems a little new and novel to a lot of us, it's something I've dealt with on several occasions. We have some areas of Los Alamos that have some more military exercises. We're trying to turn that land over to the county. We're going through, we'll be doing UXO surveys on that, unexploded ordnance surveys, and we have the Corps of Engineers come in. They'll parallel that same process. If they find unexploded ordnance, they will try and detonate it in place to render it inert.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Don't we appreciate it?
Thank you all for your time.
Thanks for staying out.